Welcome, dear friends, to a comprehensive journey through 100 facts about Jujutsu Kaisen, the dark supernatural series where sorcerers battle curses born from humanity's negative emotions, where high school student Yuji Itadori consumed a cursed finger containing the king of curses, Ryomen Sukuna, becoming vessel for ancient evil, where Satoru Gojo stands as strongest sorcerer, whose limitless technique and six eyes make him nearly invincible, where cursed energy flows through all living things, manifesting as power that sorcerers harness for exorcising malevolent spirits, where Jujutsu high schools train next generation of sorcerers whose missions involve protecting humanity from supernatural threats, and where death lurks around every corner, creating stakes that make survival feel earned rather than guaranteed. When characters face curses whose power can overwhelm even experienced sorcerers, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series where tension is constant and where consequences matter. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Are you somewhere cozy watching anime late into the night? Or perhaps you're winding down after a long day? Drop your location in the comments below, and let's see how far the Jujutsu Kaisen fandom reaches across the globe. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into the world of curses and sorcery, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more soothing anime content like this. Your support means everything and makes creating these comprehensive explorations possible. Tonight, we'll explore everything about Jujutsu Kaisen across 3 parts, totaling 100 facts, told gently like bedtime stories about the world where curses threaten humanity, where sorcerers fight in shadows, where techniques define combat, and where Gege Akutami's creation has captivated millions through compelling characters and intricate power system. So, settle into comfort, close your eyes whenever sleep beckons, and let us begin this gentle journey through Jujutsu Kaisen's dark and fascinating world. Fact 1. Jujutsu Kaisen's fundamental premise establishes that curses are supernatural entities born from negative emotions that humans produce through fear, hatred, anxiety, and other dark feelings that accumulate in locations or objects, creating malevolent spirits whose existence is direct consequence of human emotional pollution. The curse origin demonstrates how human negativity literally manifests as monsters, creating system where emotional state affects physical reality, making curses into externalized representations of humanity's collective darkness, making a series into metaphor about how negative emotions create real harm when left unchecked, making curse system philosophically rich through suggesting that confronting external monsters requires addressing internal negativity that spawns them, making Jujutsu Kaisen into story operating on literal and metaphorical levels simultaneously. Fact 2. The cursed energy that all humans unconsciously leak creates ambient supernatural radiation that non-sorcerers cannot perceive, but which Jujutsu sorcerers can see and manipulate through training that awakens ability to sense and quieter point self. Control this energy. The invisible energy demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen operates on dual reality, where mundane world and supernatural world overlap, creating situation where most humans remain blissfully unaware of constant battles happening in shadows around them, making sorcerers into secret protectors whose work preventing catastrophes goes completely unrecognized by public. They defend making jujutsu profession into thankless duty that requires accepting obscurity, where glory and recognition are impossible when success means nothing bad happened, making sorcerers into unsung heroes whose greatest victories are preventing disasters that normal people never know threaten them. Fact 3. The classification system ranking curses from grade 4 weakest through grade 3, grade 2, grade 1 to special grade strongest creates formal hierarchy that threat assessment uses for appropriate mission assignment, ensuring sorcerers aren't sent against overwhelming opposition. The bureaucratic grading demonstrates how Jujutsu Society, despite dealing with supernatural, has formal institutional structure with regulations and procedures, making curse exorcism into organized profession rather than chaotic vigilantism, making grades into practical necessity that efficient resource allocation requires when limited number of sorcerers must be deployed against constant threats, making grade system into survival mechanism, preventing waste of sorcerer lives through inappropriate matching where weak sorcerers face strong curses, creating tragedy that proper assessment might prevent. Fact 4. Curses are generally invisible to non-sorcerers, creating situation where supernatural battles occur in public spaces without witnesses perceiving combatants, making Jujutsu world into hidden layer of reality. The invisibility creates dramatic irony, where audience sees what normal people cannot, making sorcerers isolated through fighting battles that nobody else witnesses, making victories and defeats equally invisible, making sorcerer profession lonely through operating in world that runs parallel to normal society without intersection, making invisibility into protection for public whose ignorance prevents panic, but also into burden for sorcerers whose struggles remain unseen, making curse invisibility into double-edged trait that public safety and sorcerer isolation both create. Fact 5. Cursed objects are items imbued with cursed energy that can spawn curses or grant power to those who interact with them, creating dangerous artifacts that Jujutsu Society must track and secure. The object danger demonstrates how curses can be sealed or concentrated into physical items, making cursed objects into supernatural hazards that require management. Making Jujutsu work include not just exorcism, but also artifact recovery and containment, making sorcerers into combination of warriors and archaeologists whose missions involve securing dangerous relics that unleashing would create catastrophe, making cursed objects into Pandora's boxes that must remain closed, making curse sealing into incomplete solution, where defeating curse doesn't eliminate it but only contains threat that future breach could release. Fact 6. Ryomen Sukuna is identified as king of curses from Heian era over 1,000 years ago, whose power was so immense that even death couldn't completely destroy him, forcing sorcerers to seal his power into 20 indestructible fingers. The Sukuna backstory demonstrates how ancient threats persist through present with historical evil that cannot be permanently eliminated, creating ongoing danger that time doesn't diminish, making Sukuna into timeless threat whose return constantly threatens, making fingers into doomsday devices whose collection prevents catastrophe, but whose destruction is impossible, creating paradox where safest option is keeping fingers sealed and hidden, but where human curiosity and cursed energy attraction makes discovery inevitable, making Sukuna's fingers into ticking time bombs scattered across Japan. Fact 7. Each of Sukuna's 20 fingers contains portion of his immense power, making fingers into special grade cursed objects whose individual strength exceeds most curses, creating situation where single finger can devastate area. The distributed power demonstrates how even fraction of Sukuna represents enormous threat, validating fear that full resurrection inspires, making fingers into proof that Sukuna was genuinely king of curses, whose dominance wasn't exaggerated, making finger strength into demonstration that legends about Sukuna were historically accurate rather than mythological embellishment, making fingers into artifacts that validate history, making Sukuna into confirmed threat rather than uncertain legend, making each finger into miniature apocalypse weapon. Fact 8. Yuji Itadori begins series as completely normal high school student whose only unusual characteristic is extraordinary physical strength and speed that natural athleticism provides without any cursed energy enhancement or supernatural origin. The mundane beginning creates relatable protagonist whose entry into Jujutsu world is accidental rather than destined, making Yuji into audience surrogate whose ignorance mirrors viewers, creating identification through shared discovery, making Yuji into everyman thrust into extraordinary circumstances, making contrast between normal life and supernatural danger more impactful through Yuji's ordinariness, making extraordinary events feel more dramatic through protagonist who wasn't special until circumstances made him special, making Yuji into character who becomes remarkable rather than being born remarkable. Fact 9. The occult club incident, where Yuji's seniors unwittingly break seal on Sukuna's finger, releases curse that attacks them, forcing Yuji to intervene despite having no combat training or cursed energy, creating crisis that desperate measures demand. The incident demonstrates how ignorance about supernatural creates danger when well-meaning students accidentally trigger catastrophe, making curse appearance into consequence of curiosity that safety protocols would prevent, making a cult club into cautionary tale about dangers of treating supernatural as entertainment, making finger discovery into tragedy waiting to happen, making incident into preventable disaster that information control ironically enabled through L&80, keeping public ignorant about real dangers, making secrecy into liability that paradoxically creates situations it meant to prevent. Fact 10. The decision to consume Sukuna's finger to temporarily gain power for protecting friends creates defining character moment where Yuji prioritizes others, lives over his own safety, making consumption into selfless act despite being monumentally reckless. The impulsive heroism demonstrates Yuji's core values, where saving strangers mattered more than personal well-being, making finger-eating into character revelation, showing Yuji would sacrifice everything for protecting others, making consumption into thesis statement about Yuji's nature, making single decision into summary of character, whose heroism is instinctive rather than calculated, making Yuji into person who acts first and considers consequences later when others are in danger, making finger consumption into perfectly characteristic moment that established who Yuji fundamentally is, making choice into insight rather than just plot development. Fact 11. The survival after consuming Sukuna's finger, despite expectation that King of Curses would immediately seize control, creates unprecedented situation where Yuji maintains consciousness and agency despite harboring ancient evil. The retained control demonstrates Yuji's exceptional mental fortitude and compatibility as vessel, making his ability to suppress Sukuna into mystery that initially goes unexplained, creating questions about why Yuji specifically could resist when presumably others couldn't, making Yuji into enigmatic protagonist whose special qualities aren't immediately apparent, making vessel compatibility into gradual revelation rather than exposition dump, making Yuji's resistance into ongoing plot point that deeper examination would eventually address, making coexistence with Sukuna into central tension throughout series. Fact 12. Satoru Gojo arrives at a cult club to retrieve Sukuna's finger, discovering instead that Yuji consumed it, creating situation where protocol demands executing vessel immediately, but where Yuji's continued consciousness presents dilemma. The Gojo arrival creates mentor figure whose power and authority enables protecting Yuji from immediate execution, making Gojo into savior whose intervention gives Yuji chance at life, making first meeting into recruitment where Gojo recognizes Yuji's potential, making Gojo into teacher who sees promise, where others see only threat, making relationship into mentorship, where Gojo's protection enables Yuji's development, making Gojo into guardian whose strength provides shelter that Yuji's survival requires, making dynamic into protective relationship, where student depends on teacher's authority for continuing to exist. Fact 13. The death sentence that Jujutsu higher-ups immediately impose after learning Yuji harbors Sukuna demonstrates institutional rigidity, where established protocol demands executing vessels regardless of circumstances. The execution order creates antagonist in Jujutsu leadership, whose bureaucratic adherence to rules makes them obstacle despite theoretically being allies, making higher-ups into unsympathetic authority, whose inflexibility creates internal conflict, making Jujutsu society into place where rules matter more than individual cases, making death sentence into ongoing threat, hanging over Yuji, making everyday borrowed time, making existence precarious, making Yuji into a terrible fugitive whose execution postponement is temporary, reprieve rather than permanent pardon, making higher-ups into ever-present danger that political maneuvering barely restrains. Fact 14. Gojo's negotiation postpones Yuji's execution conditionally upon consuming all 20 Sukuna fingers before being executed, creates mission that defines Yuji's purpose, making finger collection into literal life or death quest. The conditional reprieve demonstrates Gojo's political influence, where strongest sorcerer could dictate terms that higher-ups accepted despite reservations, making Gojo's power into both combat superiority and political leverage, making strength into authority, making Gojo into player whose moves leadership must accommodate, making postponement into demonstration that force creates negotiating position, making Gojo's protection into shield that buys time, while recognizing that ultimate fate remains unchanged unless circumstances dramatically shift, making reprieve into stay of execution rather than commutation, making Yuji's future perpetually uncertain. Fact 15. Yuji's grandfather's dying wish that Yuji help people and die surrounded by loved ones creates moral framework, guiding protagonist choices throughout series, making deathbed request into mission statement. The final words demonstrate how Yuji's heroism has familial roots, where grandfather's teaching about helping others became internalized principle, making selflessness into inherited value, making grandfather into formative influence despite minimal screen time, making dying wish into philosophy that Yuji carries, making grandfather's words into recurring touchstone that Yuji references when making difficult choices, making death wish into mission that 9 gives Yuji purpose, making helping others into obligation that family legacy demands, making grandfather into moral compass, whose absence paradoxically makes presence felt through words that guide from beyond grave. Fact 16. Tokyo Jujutsu High serves as primary setting where sorcerers are trained, creating institution that education and mission deployment combines, making school into headquarters for Tokyo region's jujutsu operations. The school setting creates familiar framework where superpowers and education merge, making Jujutsu High into place where classes about cursed techniques occur alongside normal academic subjects, making school into unique institution that regular education and supernatural combat training somehow coexist, making campus into base of operations that students deploy, from making school into military academy equivalent, where students are simultaneously learning and actively fighting, making education into practical training, where theory and application are inseparable, making Jujutsu High into place, where classroom and battlefield blur. Fact 17. Megumi Fushiguro serves as Yuji's initial contact with Jujutsu world, being first-year student at Tokyo Jujutsu High, who was sent to retrieve Sukuna's finger before Yuji consumed it. The Megumi introduction creates deuteragonist, whose competence contrasts with Yuji's ignorance, making Megumi into experienced guide, whose knowledge helps Yuji understand Jujutsu world, making Megumi into exposition source, whose tactless explanations educate both Yuji and audience, making relationship into partnership where experienced sorcerer and talented newcomer complement each other, making Megumi into serious counterpart to Yuji's enthusiasm, making dynamic into classic odd couple pairing where personality differences create chemistry, making Megumi into straight man to Yuji's energetic protagonist, making duo into core relationship. Fact 18. Megumi's 10 Shadows technique allows summoning Shikigami animals through shadow manipulation, creating versatile ability that various creatures for different situations provides. The technique demonstrates how inherited techniques define sorcerer families, where 10 Shadows belongs to Zenin clan, making Megumi's ability into family legacy, despite complicated relationship with clan, making technique into birthright. That talent for using it must develop, making 10 Shadows into potential. That training unlocks, making Shikigami variety into strategic depth, where summoning appropriate creature for situation requires tactical thinking, making Megumi into chess player whose pieces are shadow beasts, making technique into showcase for how cursed techniques create unique fighting styles, making 10 Shadows into signature ability that defines Megumi's combat approach. Fact 19. The divine dogs are Megumi's most frequently used Shikigami, appearing as pair of wolf-like creatures that tracking and combat both handle, making them versatile summons. The dogs demonstrate how Shikigami have distinct capabilities, where divine dogs excel at pursuit and coordinated attacks, making them into reliable workhorses that most situations handle adequately, making dogs into Megumi's default option. When specialized, Shikigami aren't required, making divine dogs into foundation that more exotic summons supplement, making dogs into proof that basic doesn't mean weak when properly utilized, making frequent use into testament that reliable generalist tools often outperform specialized tools whose niche applications limit utility, making divine dogs into lesson that fundamentals matter. Fact 20. Nobara Kugisaki joins as third first-year student at Tokyo Jujutsu High, completing core trio with her confident personality and unique cursed technique, creating female protagonist. The Nobara edition balances cast through adding perspective that differs from Yuji and Megumi, making trio into complete unit, where three personalities create dynamic, making Nobara into character whose confidence borders on arrogance, making her into fearless fighter whose attitude matches combat ability, making Nobara into refreshing character who isn't defined by relationships with male characters, but has independent motivations and personality, making her into fully realized character rather than token female, making Nobara into integral team member whose contributions equal male counterparts, making trio balanced rather than male-dominated. Fact 21. Nobara's straw doll technique uses hammer, nails, and straw doll for long-range attacks by establishing connection between doll and target, allowing damage transfer. The technique demonstrates creative cursed energy application, where tools channel power, making Nobara's fighting style into ritualistic combat that preparation and precision require, making technique into elegant system where physical connection enables remote damage, making Straw Doll into voodoo-inspired ability that sympathetic magic principles follows, making Nobara into character whose technique requires thought rather than raw power, making intelligence into an asset that technique rewards, making Straw Doll into proof that clever technique design can compete with overwhelming force, making Nobara into tactical fighter whose victories come from outsmarting rather than overpowering. Fact 22. The curse tool Nobara uses, called Resonance, allows attacking curse's main body after obtaining piece of it, creating devastating effect that bypasses defenses when connection is established. The resonance application demonstrates how Nobara's technique scales with preparation, where obtaining target sample is key, making combat into two-stage process where acquiring piece precedes finishing blow, making resonance into high-risk, high-reward ability that setup requires, but which guarantees success when conditions are met, making technique into assassin tool that preparation enables, making resonance into one-shot potential that makes Nobara dangerous despite not having overwhelming power, making technique design into strength where clever mechanics compensate for lack of raw force. Fact 23. Satoru Gojo is established as world's strongest Jujutsu sorcerer, whose power is so overwhelming that his mere existence changes balance of power in Jujutsu society, making him singular force. The strongest designation demonstrates how individual power can affect entire system, where one person's strength deters threats, making Gojo into deterrent whose existence prevents conflicts, making strength into political tool, not just combat tool, making Gojo into keystone whose removal would collapse current stability, making strongest status into responsibility, where maintaining peace depends on Gojo's presence, making power into burden that comes with expectations, making Gojo into pillar, supporting Jujutsu world, making his importance extend beyond personal capability into systemic necessity, making Gojo indispensable. Fact 24. Gojo's limitless technique manipulates space at atomic level, creating barriers that slow approaching objects asymptotically, ensuring nothing can touch him, making infinity into perfect defense. The limitless creates untouchable fighter whose defense is mathematical impossibility, making Gojo into opponent who cannot be hit by conventional means, making infinity into frustrating ability that offense nullifies through making reaching Gojo impossible, making technique into ultimate defense that redefines invincibility, making limitless into demonstration of how curse technique can break combat conventions, making Gojo into character who fundamentally operates under different rules, making infinity into ability that makes Gojo immune to normal combat, making him into entity that special measures are required for threatening, making limitless into technique that makes Gojo essentially divine in invulnerability. Fact 25. The Six Eyes is rare, inherited trait that Gojo possesses, allowing perfect cursed energy, perception, and manipulation efficiency, making his cursed energy usage essentially costless. The Six Eyes demonstrates how genetic factors affect Jujutsu ability, where inherited traits create advantages that training cannot replicate, making Six Eyes into lottery that Gojo won, making efficient energy use into perpetual motion, where Gojo never exhausts cursed energy, making stamina into non-issue, making prolonged combat into Gojo's advantage when opponents tire while Gojo remains fresh, making Six Eyes into trait that practical infinity creates, where limitless cursed energy usage becomes possible, making Six Eyes into cheat ability that combined with limitless makes Gojo into essentially unbeatable, making genetic gift into cornerstone of Gojo's dominance. Fact 26. Gojo's domain expansion called Unlimited Void overwhelms targets with infinite information, causing paralysis through sensory overload that consciousness cannot process, making domain into non-lethal but absolutely effective. A technique, the information overload creates incapacitation method that doesn't require killing, demonstrating Gojo's preference for neutralizing rather than executing, making unlimited void into merciful technique, despite being irresistible, making domain into demonstration that killing isn't necessary when enemy can be rendered helpless, making unlimited void into ultimate control technique, where targets become vegetables whose consciousness drowns in infinity, making domain into philosophical weapon that makes victims experience everything and nothing simultaneously, making unlimited void into existential attack that breaks minds rather than bodies. Fact 27. Gojo's personality combines playful irreverence with serious dedication to protecting students, creating teacher who jokes constantly, but whose commitment to their safety is absolute. The personality dichotomy demonstrates how Gojo's power enables casualness, where being strongest means nothing threatens him, making playfulness into luxury that invincibility affords, making jokes into coping mechanism for lonely existence at top, where peers don't exist, making irreverence into shield, protecting emotional core, that isolation threatened, making Gojo into character whose cheerfulness masks burden of responsibility, making teacher role into purpose that gives meaning beyond just being powerful, making students into people Gojo genuinely cares about despite seeming flippant, making personality into mask that protects vulnerability. Fact 28. The Cursed Womb arc introduces special grade curse that attacks detention center, creating crisis that first-year students accidentally confront when mission parameters prove inaccurate. The womb incident demonstrates how grade miscalculation creates deadly situations where students face opposition beyond capabilities, making mission into tragedy that misinformation enabled, making incident into demonstration that jujutsu work is dangerous, where mistakes cost lives, making womb arc into wake-up call, where reality of sorcerer profession becomes visceral, making incident into turning point, where students realize mortality, making womb into catalyst that more innocence destroyed, making arc into coming-of-age moment where children realize they might die, making womb incident into loss of innocence. Fact 29. Yuji's apparent death during Cursed Womb mission creates first major emotional impact, where protagonist seemingly dies early in series, creating shock that subverts expectations about main character immunity. The death demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen doesn't guarantee safety where even protagonist can die, making death into real threat, rather than abstract possibility, making Yuji's death into moment that establishes series' willingness to kill characters, making mortality into constant presence, making subsequent dangers feel genuinely threatening because death already occurred, making revival later, not diminishing impact of moment where Yuji actually died, making death into formative trauma for classmates who witnessed it, making Yuji's death into defining moment, that tone established making series into story where anyone can die. Fact 30. Sukuna's binding vow with Yuji resurrects protagonist in exchange for terms that Sukuna dictates, creating devil's bargain that Yuji accepts without knowing conditions. The revival demonstrates how Sukuna manipulates situations to his advantage, where death becomes opportunity for negotiation, making Sukuna into schemer whose plans operate on time frames that immediate concerns, obscure, making binding vow into trap that Yuji willingly entered without understanding implications, making revival into victory that Sukuna achieved, making resurrection into moment where Sukuna gains leverage, making binding vow into Chekhov's gun, that future consequences will reveal, making deal into ticking bomb whose detonation is delayed but inevitable, making Sukuna into patient predator whose schemes unfold slowly. Fact 31. The revelation that Yuji survived remains secret from Jujutsu higher-ups, with Gojo hiding his resurrection, allowing Yuji to train without execution threat looming immediately. The concealment demonstrates Gojo's protective instinct where bending rules protect students, making secrecy into gift that breathing room provides, making hidden survival into opportunity for training, that open existence would deny, making concealment into strategic decision where temporary deception enables long-term preparation, making Gojo into chess player who moves pieces, creating situations that goals advance, making secrecy into investment where present risk enables future payoff, making Gojo's gamble into calculated risk that Yuji's potential justifies, making concealment into act of faith in students' future value. Fact 32. The Kyoto Sister School Goodwill event brings together Tokyo and Kyoto Jujutsu High students for competition that combat training disguises as friendly rivalry, creating tournament arc. The event demonstrates how Jujutsu education includes competitive elements where students from different schools test skills against each other, making Goodwill event into tradition that camaraderie and rivalry balances, making competition into opportunity for growth, where facing different fighting styles expands, experience making event into controlled environment where students can fight seriously without actual mortal danger, making tournament into safe space for testing, limits making Goodwill event into educational tool that practical application emphasizes, making event into demonstration, that training includes competition that cooperation alone wouldn't provide. Fact 33. The principal of Tokyo Jujutsu High, Masamichi Yaga, creates cursed corpses as specialty, making him unique sorcerer, whose ability involves imbuing dolls with artificial souls that independent consciousness grants. The cursed corpse creation demonstrates how diverse jujutsu techniques can be, where Yaga's ability is creation rather than destruction, making him into craftsman whose power is building rather than fighting, making cursed corpses into artificial life that questions definitions of consciousness, making Yaga into character, whose technique has philosophical implications about what constitutes life, making creation ability into rare talent that construction rather than combat emphasizes, making Yaga into support specialist whose contributions are infrastructure rather than direct combat, making cursed corpses into legacy that persists beyond creator, making Yaga into character whose impact is lasting rather than momentary. And so concludes the first part of our Jujutsu Kaisen journey, having explored curses born from negative emotions, Sukuna's indestructible fingers containing King of Curses power, Yuji's accidental consumption making him vessel, death sentence and conditional reprieve, Tokyo Jujutsu High's educational mission, core trio of Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara with their distinct techniques, Gojo's overwhelming power through Limitless and Six Eyes, Cursed Womb mission, and Yuji's apparent death, resurrection through Binding Vow, and Goodwill event setting. Rest now if sleep calls, or continue to part 2 where we'll discover more characters, techniques, and the dark conspiracies threatening Jujutsu world. Sleep gently, dear friends. Welcome back, dear friends, to our continuing exploration of Jujutsu Kaisen's dark and intricate world. In this second part, we'll discover the diverse array of curse techniques that define combat styles, explore domain expansions as ultimate expressions of Jujutsu power, meet the extended cast of sorcerers whose abilities and personalities enrich the story, investigate the antagonists whose schemes threaten Jujutsu society, examine the political machinations within Jujutsu hierarchy, uncover the tragic backstories that motivate characters, and delve into the philosophical questions about strength, sacrifice, and what it means to save people. So settle back comfortably, close your eyes when sleep beckons, and let us continue this gentle journey through the world where curses and sorcerers clash in eternal struggle. Fact 34. Maki Zenin is second year student at Tokyo Jujutsu High, who possesses virtually no cursed energy, making her unable to see curses without special glasses, yet compensates through extraordinary physical prowess and cursed tool mastery. The zero cursed energy creates unique situation where Maki exists as sorcerer who cannot perform typical jujutsu, making her into warrior who fights supernatural with physical means, making Maki into character who succeeds despite lacking fundamental requirement for jujutsu sorcery, making her existence into rebellion against system that values cursed energy above all, making Maki into proof that alternative paths to strength exist, making physical training into compensation for spiritual deficiency, making Maki into inspiration for how dedication can overcome inherent disadvantage, making her into character who refuses accepting limitations that biology imposed. Fact 35. The Zenin clan's prejudice against Maki due to her lack of cursed energy created oppressive childhood, where family dismissed her as worthless, making her leave clan to prove them wrong. The clan rejection demonstrates how Jujutsu society's rigid hierarchies create casualties where those not fitting mold are discarded, making Zenin clan into antagonist in Maki's story, whose disdain motivated her improvement making, family into obstacle that Maki's success defies, making departure into declaration of independence, where proving family wrong became driving force, making Maki into character whose strength derives from spite and determination, making rejection into fuel that ambition burned, making Zenin clan into example of how traditional institutions harm those who deviate from norm, making Maki's story into critique of systems that value bloodline over effort. Fact 36. Toge Inumaki is second-year student whose cursed speech technique imbues words with cursed energy, forcing targets to obey commands, but which damages his throat with use, creating limited communication ability. The speech limitation demonstrates how powerful techniques come with severe restrictions, where cursed speech's effectiveness is balanced by health cost and communication barrier, making Toge into character who speaks minimally to preserve throat, making silence into cursed necessity rather than choice, making Toge into tactical fighter who must carefully choose when speaking is worth physical toll-making, cursed speech into double-edged sword, where power comes at price, making technique into resource management, where every command depletes limited reserve, making Toge into strategic combatant who cannot spam ability, making limitations into balancing mechanism that prevents technique from being overpowered. Fact 37. Toge's vocabulary restriction to rice ball ingredients as safe words creates communication system, where salmon means affirmation, bonito flakes means negation, and other ingredients convey specific meanings, allowing conversation without risking accidental, cursed commands. The ingredient language demonstrates how Toge adapted to limitation, creating workaround that communication enables without danger, making rice ball vocabulary into code that teammates understand, making Toge into character who turned disability into quirk, making ingredient speech into endearing characteristic that makes Toge memorable, making limitation into personality trait rather than just handicap, making Toge into example of adaptation where restriction forced creativity, making ingredient vocabulary into solution that maintains social connection despite dangerous technique, making Toge into character who refused isolation that dangerous speech might otherwise impose. Fact 38. Panda is sentient cursed corpse created by Principal Yaga, appearing as giant panda who attends Tokyo Jujutsu High as second-year student, despite not being human, making him unique entity in Jujutsu world. The cursed corpse nature demonstrates how diverse Jujutsu world's inhabitants are, where artificial beings can achieve consciousness, making Panda into philosophical question about what constitutes life, making him into person, despite being constructed rather than born, making Panda into character whose existence challenges definitions, making artificial life into accepted reality, making Panda into student whose non-human nature is treated casually, making species into non-issue where Panda is judged by character rather than origin, making Panda into beloved character whose artificial nature is detail rather than defining characteristic, making him into proof that personhood transcends biology. Fact 39. Panda's multiple cores give him 3 distinct modes: Panda, Balanced, Gorilla, Power, and a secret third core, creating versatile fighting style that situation dictates. The multiple cores demonstrate how cursed corpse construction allows complexity that biological beings lack, making Panda into character with literal split personalities that combat modes represent, making core switching into tactical, a decision where appropriate mode for situation must be chosen, making Panda into adaptable fighter whose versatility comes from multiple selves, making cores into demonstration of Yaga's mastery, where creating being with multiple souls showcases skill, making Panda into masterwork that creator's genius represents, making multiple cores into unique trait that only cursed corpses possess, making Panda into special existence that construction method enables. Fact 40. Aoi Todo is third-year student at Kyoto Jujutsu High, whose eccentric personality includes asking everyone about their type in women as greeting while possessing exceptional combat ability, making him into battle-obsessed fighter. The type question demonstrates Todo's peculiarity, where romantic preferences matter disproportionately to him, making question into character signature that makes Todo memorable, making type inquiry into running gag that breaks tension, making Todo into comic relief, whose strength makes comedy work because contrast between silly question and genuine danger creates humor, making Todo into character who doesn't take self too seriously, despite being powerful, making personality into refreshing change, from stoic warriors, making Todo into character who enjoys fighting without being psychopath, making battle enthusiasm into positive trait, rather than bloodlust, making Todo into lovable eccentric, whose weirdness is charming rather than off-putting. Fact 41. Todo's boogie-woogie technique allows swapping positions of anything containing cursed energy by clapping, creating teleportation ability that tactical creativity enables, making him into tricky opponent whose position is never certain. The clap-activated swap demonstrates how technique mechanics can be simple yet effective, where position exchange creates combat chaos, making boogie-woogie into ability that fights become three-dimensional puzzles where spatial reasoning matters, making swaps into mind games where predicting Todo's next exchange is impossible, making technique into demonstration that clever ability design beats raw power, making boogie-woogie into beloved technique whose visual, spectacle, and tactical depth both satisfy, making swaps into signature move that defines Todo's fighting style, making position exchange into tool that mastery elevates, making Todo into fighter whose technique rewards intelligence. Fact 42. The bond Todo forms with Yuji during Goodwill event creates brotherhood, where Todo decides Yuji is his best friend based on answer to type question, creating instant camaraderie that carries through series. The instant friendship demonstrates Todo's passionate nature, where connections form quickly when criteria are met, making best friend declaration into commitment that Todo honors, making brotherhood into relationship where Todo becomes mentor invested in Yuji's growth, making friendship into positive force that training and support both include, making Todo into ally whose investment in Yuji's success is genuine, making brotherhood into heartwarming relationship where mutual respect develops, making Todo into character who supports rather than competes, making friendship into demonstration that rivals can become allies when mutual understanding develops, making Todo Yuji dynamic into highlight of series. Fact 43. Mai Zenin is Maki's twin sister attending Kyoto Jujutsu High, whose resentment toward Maki stems from complicated family dynamics, where Mai's moderate cursed energy made her clan's consolation prize after Maki's departure. The twin relationship demonstrates how same family can produce opposite outcomes, where Mai wanted staying while Maki wanted leaving, making sisters into contrasts where different responses to oppression created rift, making Mai into character whose bitterness toward Maki conceals underlying care, making relationship into tragic separation where sisters who should support each other instead hurt each other, making twins into demonstration of how circumstances can poison relationships, making Mai into victim whose anger toward Maki is misdirected, pain about situation neither could control, making twin dynamic into painful relationship that love and resentment simultaneously contain. Fact 44. Kasumi Miwa is second year at Kyoto Jujutsu High, whose humble demeanor and self-deprecating attitude contrast with genuine competence, making her into relatable character who feels ordinary despite being capable. The ordinary feeling demonstrates how perspective shapes self-image, where Miwa, comparing herself to exceptional peers, makes her feel inadequate, despite being skilled, making Miwa into character whose insecurity is relatable, making self-doubt into humanizing trait that makes her sympathetic, making Miwa into favorite whose modesty and kindness make her beloved, making ordinary nature into appeal, where being normal in extraordinary world makes Miwa into audience, stand-in, making relatability into strength that character, grounded rather than exaggerated, making Miwa into breath of fresh air, whose normalcy is refreshing. Fact 45. Noritoshi Kamo is heir to Kamo clan, attending Kyoto Jujutsu High, whose blood manipulation technique demonstrates inherited technique's power, while his dutiful personality shows burden of family expectations. The heir status demonstrates how Jujutsu clans operate as dynasties, where leadership succession creates pressure, making Noritoshi into character whose duty conflicts with personal desires, making family obligation into weight that choices constrains, making heir burden into theme, where inherited position isn't privilege but responsibility, making Noritoshi into sympathetic character whose circumstances limit freedom, making duty into chain that binds, making blood manipulation into power that comes with expectations, making technique into symbol of family legacy that Noritoshi must uphold, making inheritance into blessing and curse simultaneously. Fact 46. Ultimate Mekamaru is cursed corpse, remotely piloted by Kokichi Muda, whose real body is bedridden with heavenly restriction that traded healthy body for enormous cursed energy range. The remote operation demonstrates how disability shapes jujutsu practice, where Kokichi's immobility forced developing long-distance control, making Mekamaru into prosthetic body that allows participation, making remote piloting into compensation for biological limitation, making Kokichi into character whose suffering is constant, where every moment is pain, making heavenly restriction into cruel bargain, where power came at terrible price, making Kokichi into tragic figure whose entire life is suffering, making Mekamaru into window to world that Kokichi cannot physically access, making remote body into both lifeline and reminder of imprisoned real body. Fact 47. Cursed techniques are generally inherited through bloodlines, making Jujutsu society into aristocracy where powerful families maintain dominance through passing techniques to descendants, creating hereditary hierarchy. The inheritance system demonstrates how Jujutsu world is stratified, where birth determines potential, making technique inheritance into lottery that some win and others lose, making bloodline into destiny that individual cannot escape, making inherited techniques into advantage that training alone cannot replicate, making Jujutsu society into place where meritocracy is myth and aristocracy is reality, making family into most important factor for success, making birth into determining factor, making inherited techniques into mechanism, perpetuating inequality, making bloodline supremacy into systemic issue that Jujutsu world cannot address without fundamentally restructuring. Fact 48. Innate techniques are unique, cursed abilities that individuals are born with representing personal expression of cursed energy, making each sorcerer's technique into reflection of self. The innate nature demonstrates how techniques are extension of user, where ability and personality correlate, making techniques into characterization tools, where powers reflect users, making innate techniques into windows, into souls, making abilities into expressions of inner nature, making technique variety into demonstration of human diversity, making personal techniques into unique fingerprints that no two sorcerers share, making innate techniques into individuality, made manifest, making powers into aspects of identity, rather than just tools, making techniques into essential parts of who sorcerers are. Fact 49. Domain expansion represents ultimate expression of cursed technique, creating separate space where users' technique is guaranteed to hit, making domains into trump cards that battles decide. The guaranteed hit demonstrates how domains bypass normal combat, where evasion becomes impossible, making domains into overwhelm tactics, where entering domain means facing unavoidable attack, making domain expansion into technique that fundamentally changes engagement, making domains into win conditions, where successfully deploying domain usually means victory, making domain expansion into goal that sorcerers aspire to achieving, making domain mastery into mark of elite sorcerer, making guaranteed hit into reason domains are feared, making domain expansion into technique that separates strong from weak, making domain capability into threshold that divides tiers. Fact 50. The barrier technique required for domain expansion involves creating bounded space, separated from reality, demonstrating advanced, cursed energy manipulation that only skilled sorcerers achieve. The barrier requirement demonstrates technical difficulty, where domain expansion requires mastery of multiple disciplines, making domains into techniques that years of training are necessary for developing, making barrier creation into fundamental skill that domain achievement prerequisites, making domain expansion into culmination of sorcerer's development, making domains into proof of mastery, making barrier technique into foundation that domains build upon, making spatial manipulation into skill that separates competent from elite, making domain expansion into achievement that dedication and talent both require, making domains into exclusive club that only exceptional sorcerers join. Fact 51. Domain amplification is technique that neutralizes cursed techniques by creating small domain around user that cancels opposing techniques, creating counter to powerful abilities. The amplification counter demonstrates how Jujutsu has checks and balances where no technique is absolute, making domain amplification into response that powerful techniques necessitated, making amplification into equalizer that technique supremacy challenges, making amplification into tool that weaker sorcerers can use against stronger opponents, making domain amplification into demonstration that Jujutsu evolution continues, where new techniques emerge to counter existing powers, making amplification into arms race, result where offense and defense perpetually escalate, making domain amplification in technique that proves adaptation is constant. Fact 52. Simple domain is incomplete version of domain expansion that creates small barrier without guaranteed hit, providing defensive utility that full domain's resource cost doesn't require. The simple version demonstrates how techniques have graduated complexity, where mastering basics precedes achieving advanced forms, making simple domain into stepping stone toward full domain expansion, making simple version into practical technique that deployment cost makes sustainable, making simple domain into technique that accessibility makes popular, where full domains are rare. Simple domains are common, making simple version into proof that partial mastery has value, making simple domain into technique that serves purpose despite being incomplete, making simplified versions into valid choices when situation doesn't justify full power. Fact 53. Mahito is special grade cursed spirit whose idle transfiguration technique allows reshaping souls and bodies, creating horrifying ability that human form corrupts. The soul manipulation demonstrates how curses can have conceptual abilities where Mahito's power targets essence rather than form, making idle transfiguration into existential threat that changes what victims fundamentally are making. Mahito into terror, whose attacks corrupt rather than kill, making soul manipulation into violation worse than death, making Mahito into antagonist, whose power is disturbing, making idle transfiguration into technique that audience fears, because implications are horrifying, making soul reshaping into cruelty, that physical torture exceeds making Mahito into monster, whose enjoyment of suffering makes him hateable, making idle transfiguration into power that should not exist. Fact 54. Mahito's philosophy about souls and curses being true humans, while humans are imposters, creates twisted worldview that makes him dismiss human suffering as meaningless. The inverted morality demonstrates how curses think differently, where Mahito genuinely believes curses are superior, making philosophy into justification for cruelty, making Mahito into antagonist who isn't conflicted about evil, making certainty about curse supremacy into trait that makes Mahito irredeemable, making philosophy into window into curse mentality where human values don't apply, making Mahito into pure antagonist whose defeat is necessary because redemption is impossible, making worldview into a lard characteristic that makes Mahito into great villain because believing own righteousness makes conviction absolute, making philosophy into foundation for actions that hesitation never weakens. Fact 55. Jogo is special grade cursed spirit representing fear of volcanic eruptions and earth, whose immense destructive power makes him formidable opponent despite inferiority to top-tier sorcerers. The volcanic nature demonstrates how curses embody fears, where Jogo is manifestation of terror about natural disasters, making him into force of nature, given consciousness, making volcanic powers into arsenal that devastation casual creates, making Jogo into threat whose attacks are cataclysmic, making fire and lava into weapons that areas destroy, making Jogo into curse whose power is undeniable, despite personality making him into antagonist who deserves respect for strength, even when personality makes him seem less threatening, making volcanic powers into demonstration that Jogo is dangerous, making special grade designation into earned title that combat ability justifies. Fact 56. Hanami is special grade cursed spirit embodying fear of land, exploitation, and environmental destruction, whose plant-based abilities create forest growth and manipulation powers. The environmental theme demonstrates how curses reflect contemporary anxieties, where fear about ecological damage births curse protecting nature, making Hanami into antagonist with sympathetic motivation, where protecting planet from humanity is goal, making Hanami into eco-terrorist whose methods are wrong but whose concerns are valid, making environmental curse into commentary about how human activity creates backlash, making Hanami into character whose existence is accusation against humanity's environmental crimes, making plant powers into nature's revenge, making Hanami into curse that humanity created through own destructiveness, making environmental curse into mirror, reflecting human guilt. Fact 57. The cursed spirit group's plan involves collecting Sukuna's fingers to unseal imprisoned curses and reshape world, demonstrates organized opposition that strategic thinking employs. The conspiracy demonstrates how curses can be intelligent, where coordinated plans replace mindless violence, making curse group into credible threat, whose schemes are sophisticated, making curses into antagonists who think long-term, making conspiracy into plot that multiple steps involves making curse plan into danger. That unfolding gradually makes tension build, making organized curses into new paradigm where curses aren't just monsters but are faction with entrance, agenda, making conspiracy into demonstration that curses evolved beyond simple threats, becoming political force that Jujutsu society must counter through strategy rather than just combat, making curse plan into chess game where moves and counter-moves determine outcome. Fact 58. Pseudo-Geto appears as Suguru Geto, restored, creating mystery about how dead sorcerer returned, while actually being ancient sorcerer inhabiting body through technique. The false Geto demonstrates how identity can be deceived where appearance doesn't guarantee authenticity, making pseudo-Geto into infiltrator whose disguise is perfect, making body theft into violation that murdered persons, form puppets, making pseudo-Geto into desecration of Geto's corpse, making identity theft into crime that trust exploits, making false identity into tool that manipulation enables, making pseudo-Geto into antagonist whose existence is offense, making body possession into technique that shows Jujutsu's dark possibilities, making identity into negotiable concept where body and soul can separate, making pseudo-Geto into philosophical question about what makes person themselves. Fact 59. Kenjaku is revealed as ancient sorcerer who transfers brain to different bodies, continuing existence across centuries, making him into immortal schemer whose plans span generations. The body hopping demonstrates how some sorcerers pursue immortality through unconventional means, where consciousness transfer cheats death, making Kenjaku into planner whose schemes operate on timescales that normal lifespans don't limit, making immortality into advantage that patience enables, making Kenjaku into opponent who can afford waiting, making long-term planning into weapon that Kenjaku wields, making body transfer into technique that makes Kenjaku eternal, making immortal schemer into threat that cannot be simply waited out, making Kenjaku into antagonist whose defeat requires active opposition because time favors him, making body hopping into technique that makes Kenjaku into living history whose experience spans centuries. Fact 60. The Shibuya incident arc creates massive event where curses attack crowded urban area during Halloween, creating crisis that multiple plot threads converges, making Shibuya into turning point. The incident demonstrates escalation where stakes reach peak, making Shibuya into battle that changes everything, making urban warfare into chaos where civilians are hostages, making crowded setting into trap that limits sorcerers, making Halloween timing into deliberate choice where crowds are maximum, making Shibuya into disaster where casualty count is massive, making incident into trauma that survivors carry, making Shibuya arc into series climax, where consequences are permanent, making incident into event that Jujutsu world cannot recover from, unchanged, making Shibuya into watershed moment, where before and after are distinct eras, making incident into catastrophe that reshapes landscape. Fact 61. Gojo's sealing in prison realm during Shibuya incident removes strongest sorcerer from board, creating power vacuum that Jujutsu society cannot fill. The sealing demonstrates strategic brilliance, where removing Gojo was necessary. First step, making prison realm into tool. That only way of neutralizing invincible sorcerer was trapping rather than defeating, making sealing into admission. That Gojo couldn't be killed, making prison realm into deus ex machina. In reverse, where protagonist advantage is removed, making Gojo's absence into crisis, where remaining sorcerers must cope without safety net, making sealing into a do-it moment where series fundamentally changes, making Gojo's removal into paradigm shift, where assumptions about safety evaporate, making sealing into technique that changes everything. Fact 62. Prison realm is special grade cursed object that traps targets in boundary between dimensions, making escape impossible from outside and time flowing differently inside. The prison mechanics demonstrate how cursed objects can be more dangerous than curses, where artifact provides permanent containment, making prison realm into ultimate prison, where captivity is eternal, making time dilation into torture, where centuries pass for prisoner while moments pass outside, making prison realm into cruel fate that existence without end promises, making containment into technique that death would be mercy compared to making prison realm into object whose use is desperate measure, making sealing into last resort that only absolute necessity justifies, making prison realm into demonstration that cursed objects can determine battles more than cursed energy. Fact 63. Nanami Kento is grade 1 sorcerer and former salaryman, whose ratio technique creates artificial weak points on targets, making him into precise fighter whose attacks identify optimal strike locations. The ratio technique demonstrates analytical fighting where mathematics guides combat, making weak point creation into scientific approach, making Nanami into methodical warrior whose battles are calculated, making precision into strength, where finding optimal attack angle matters more than raw power, making ratio into technique that intelligence rewards, making Nanami into character whose competence is refreshing, making professional demeanor into trait that makes him reliable, making ratio technique into ability that suits personality, where precise technique matches precise thinking, making Nanami into character whose technique is perfect expression of self. Fact 64. Nanami's worldview about jujutsu sorcery being terrible job, but someone having to do it creates reluctant hero whose dedication stems from duty rather than passion. The reluctance demonstrates realistic motivation where not everyone loves their work, making Nanami into character who continues despite disliking profession, making duty into motivation that passion doesn't require, making Nanami into adult whose maturity shows through acceptance that necessary work isn't always enjoyable, making reluctant service into admirable trait where doing right thing despite not wanting to shows character, making Nanami into mentor whose wisdom is helping others while acknowledging difficulty, making realistic attitude into refreshing change, from enthusiastic heroes, making Nanami into character whose complaints are valid, but whose dedication is absolute. Fact 65. Nanami's death during Shibuya incident creates devastating loss, where beloved character is killed by Mahito, demonstrating that no one is safe, making death into shock that resonates. The death demonstrates Jujutsu Kaisen's willingness to kill important characters where popularity doesn't guarantee survival, making Nanami's death into emotional gut punch that makes danger feel real, making loss into a moment that trauma crystallizes, making Mahito into hateable for killing beloved character, making death into consequence that combats risks finally manifest, making Nanami's final words about leaving rest to Yuji into passing torch, making death into sacrifice that meaning has even as loss creates pain, making Nanami's death into turning point where innocence dies with him, making loss into passion, wound that doesn't heal. Fact 66. Junpei Yoshino's arc introduces civilian, corrupted by Mahito, creating tragedy, where lonely teenager is manipulated into becoming curse user before being killed, demonstrating cruelty. The manipulation demonstrates how curses exploit vulnerability, where Mahito befriended Junpei specifically to hurt Yuji, making Junpei into pawn, whose suffering was means to end, making friendship into lie that cruelty concealed, making Junpei's hope for understanding into trap-making, Mahito's betrayal into demonstration of curse evil, making Junpei's death into moment where Yuji's idealism is tested, making tragedy into lesson about how not everyone can be saved, making Junpei into character whose arc is suffering, making manipulation into crime that shows Mahito's monstrosity, making Junpei's story into heartbreak that establishes series' dark tone. And so concludes the second part of our Jujutsu Kaisen journey, having explored diverse curse techniques from Maki's physical prowess to Toge's cursed speech, domain expansions as ultimate techniques, the extended cast including Todo, Panda, and Kyoto students, special grade curses like Mahito and Jogo with their terrifying abilities, Kenjaku's immortal scheming through body hopping, the catastrophic Shibuya incident where Gojo was sealed, Nanami's tragic death, and Junpei's heartbreaking manipulation. Rest now if sleep calls, or continue to final part where we'll discover more about Jujutsu Society, character development, themes, and series' lasting impact. Sleep gently, dear friends. Welcome back, dear friends, to the final part of our comprehensive exploration of Jujutsu Kaisen. In this concluding section, we'll discover the philosophical depths underlying combat and choices, explore character growth through trauma and triumph, investigate the Culling Game arc's deadly tournament, examine the series' themes about death and meaning, uncover the animation excellence that brought manga to life, delve into Gege Akutami's creative philosophy and decision-making, explore the cultural impact Jujutsu Kaisen has achieved, and conclude with reflections on what makes this dark supernatural series resonate so powerfully with audiences worldwide. So settle back one final time, close your eyes whenever sleep beckons, and let us complete this gentle journey through everything that makes Jujutsu Kaisen extraordinary. Fact 67. The heavenly restriction is rare condition where individuals are born with binding vows that trade cursed energy for physical capabilities, creating sorcerers who excel through non-supernatural means, demonstrating alternative path to power. The restriction demonstrates how Jujutsu World has multiple power sources, where cursed energy isn't only avenue creating space for warriors like Maki and Toji, whose physical prowess compensates for spiritual deficiency, making heavenly restriction into proof that different strengths can achieve similar results, making restriction into gift disguised as curse, where losing cursed energy unlocks physical potential that normal humans cannot achieve, making heavenly restriction into demonstration that limitations can become advantages when properly leveraged, making condition into example of how disadvantage in one area creates advantage in another, making balance into universal principle where gaining time dollars from our come and losing are inseparable, making heavenly restriction into philosophy made physical. Fact 68. Toji Fushiguro, Megumi's father, possessed heavenly restriction that eliminated cursed energy, completely granting him physical capabilities, surpassing human limits, making him into legendary assassin who killed sorcerers despite having no cursed energy himself, demonstrating that non-sorcerers can threaten even powerful sorcerers. The zero cursed energy made Toji invisible to cursed energy detection, creating assassin who couldn't be sensed, making Toji into perfect killer whose absence of cursed energy was stealth, ability making invisibility into advantage that made ambush, his specialty making Toji into character who proved sorcerers weren't invincible, making his existence into threat that shook Jujutsu World's foundations, making Toji into legend whose name invoked fear despite being dead, making his legacy into shadow over present, making Toji into character whose impact persists through Megumi, carrying burden of father's reputation, making Toji into absent presence whose influence shapes son's journey. Fact 69. The Zenin clan's hierarchy values cursed technique possession above all else, creating oppressive environment where worth is determined by inherited ability, making clan into meritocracy based on genetic lottery rather than effort. The technique obsession demonstrates how jujutsu families perpetuate inequality, where bloodline determines status, making Zenin clan into aristocracy that maintains power through inherited advantages, making clan into microcosm of jujutsu, society's broader problems, where birth matters more than achievement, making technique inheritance into system that privileges lucky while oppressing unlucky, making Zenin clan into example of how traditional institutions harm those who pressed don't fit mold, making clan's eventual downfall into karmic justice, where oppression created enemies who destroyed oppressors, making Zenin clan into cautionary tale about how cruelty breeds rebellion, making clan massacre into consequence that systemic abuse inevitably produces. Fact 70. Maki's development parallels Toji's path, where massacre of Zenin clan eliminates cursed energy, completely granting her true heavenly restriction, creating transformation that makes her into warrior matching Toji's legendary strength, demonstrating that trauma can catalyze growth even as it destroys. The awakening demonstrates how heavenly restriction's full potential requires complete severance, where even minimal cursed energy prevents maximum physical enhancement, making Mai's death into sacrifice that freed Maki through severing twin connection that limited both, making awakening into tragedy where power came from losing sister, making strength into burden, weighted with grief, making Maki's ascension into hollow victory, where becoming strongest meant losing what mattered, making power into curse, that suffering purchased, making Maki into character who gained everything and lost everything simultaneously, making transformation into reminder that power's price is sometimes too high, even when paid willingly. Fact 71. Yuta Okotsu serves as protagonist of prequel series Jujutsu Kaisen 0 before appearing in main series as special grade sorcerer, whose connection to cursed spirit Rika grants immense power, making him into second only to Gojo in strength. The prequel protagonist demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen's world is rich enough that multiple protagonists can coexist, where Yuta's story preceded Yuji's, making Yuta into character with complete arc before main series begins, making his return into event where proven hero joins ongoing story, making Yuta into powerhouse whose absence was temporary, making special grade designation into earned title, that prequel journey justified, making Yuta into character whose strength is established, making him into ally whose capabilities are known, making Yuta into trump card that desperate situations can deploy, making second strongest into position that enormous responsibility carries. Fact 72. Rika Orimoto was Yuta's childhood friend whose death and curse transformation made her into Queen of Curses that protected Yuta obsessively, creating special grade cursed spirit born from love twisted by death. The tragic origin demonstrates how positive emotions can birth curses when death corrupts love, making Rika into example that curses aren't only born from negative feelings, but from any extreme emotion that death warps, making love into curse when loss prevents moving on, making Rika into demonstration that attachment can become chain, making childhood promise into prison, that death transformed into eternal binding, making Rika into curse that love created, making her existence into tragedy where devotion became monstrosity, making Rika into reminder that even beautiful emotions can create horror when twisted by people or circumstances, making love into double-edged emotion that blessing or curse becomes depending on context. Fact 73. The copy technique that Yuta possesses after releasing Rika allows him to replicate any cursed technique he witnesses, creating versatility that makes him unpredictable opponent whose arsenal constantly expands. The copying ability demonstrates how some techniques grant meta advantages where learning opponent abilities turns their strengths against them, making copy into technique that experience accumulates, making Yuta into fighter who becomes stronger through encountering diverse opponents, making copying into learning made instant, making Yuta into character whose potential is unlimited when given time to observe techniques, making copy into ability that makes Yuta into Swiss Army knife whose tools multiply, making versatility into strength where having answer to every situation makes Yuta into complete fighter whose only limitation is what techniques he's observed, making copy into technique that rewards curiosity and exploration. Fact 74. The Culling Game arc introduces Deadly Tournament where participants must kill each other to score points, creating battle royale that forces confrontation, making game into massacre. The game mechanics demonstrate escalation where stakes reach maximum, making Culling Game into situation where survival requires murder, making game into trap where refusing participation means death, making rules into system that kill incentivizes, making game into demonstration of cruelty where designer force death matches, making Culling Game into arc where characters must adapt to ruthless environment, making game into pressure cooker where alliances form and break based on survival, making rules into oppressive structure that freedom eliminates, making Culling Game into dystopian scenario where civilization's veneer strips away, revealing survival instinct underneath, making game into examination of how people behave when laws disappear. Fact 75. The awakening of new sorcerers through forced activation of cursed techniques creates population of inexperienced sorcerers thrust into culling game, creating victims who didn't choose jujutsu life. The forced awakening demonstrates how antagonists created army through non-consensual transformation, where normal people became sorcerers against will, making awakening into violation, where choice was stolen, making new sorcerers into conscripts, whose participation is mandatory, making forced awakening into crime that bodily autonomy violated, making technique activation into curse, disguised as gift, where power came with obligation to fight, making new sorcerers into tragic figures whose normal lives ended through malicious intervention, making awakening into demonstration of how powerful sorcerers can reshape world according to their desires, making forced transformation into ultimate control, where victims' very nature was changed without consent. Fact 76. Hakari Kinji is third-year student whose gambling-themed technique called Idle Death Gamble creates probability-based combat, where jackpot grants temporary invincibility, making him into high-variance fighter. The gambling technique demonstrates how cursed techniques can incorporate chance, where outcomes vary based on luck, making Hakari into character whose strength fluctuates, making probability into power source, where favorable odds create dominance while unfavorable odds create vulnerability, making Idle Death Gamble into technique that risk and reward perfectly balances, making Hakari into gambler whose confidence in odds makes him fearless, making jackpot invincibility into payoff that risk justifies, making gambling technique into metaphor for how Hakari lives, where taking chances is lifestyle, making probability manipulation into technique that suits personality, where gambler has gambling power, making Hakari into character whose technique is perfect self-expression. Fact 77. Higuruma Hiromi is newly awakened sorcerer and former defense attorney whose sense of justice manifests as domain expansion called deadly sentencing that judges targets in courtroom, creating legal-themed combat. The courtroom domain demonstrates how techniques reflect personality, where lawyers' sense of justice became literal trial, making deadly sentencing into domain that judgment passes, making Higuruma into judge whose verdicts are absolute. Within domain, making legal proceedings into combat, mechanic making guilt and innocence into factors that determine outcome, making courtroom into battlefield where arguments matter more than strength, making Higuruma into character whose profession shaped power, making attorney background into foundation for technique, making justice into weapon that Higuruma wields, making legal system into cursed technique, making courtroom domain into demonstration that any concept can become jujutsu ability. Fact 78. The character development throughout series emphasizes trauma's lasting impact, where characters carry psychological wounds that shape decisions, demonstrating that Jujutsu Kaisen takes mental health seriously, refusing to treat trauma as temporary obstacle that willpower overcomes. The realistic trauma portrayal demonstrates how series respects that suffering leaves permanent marks, where characters don't simply move on from devastating events, making trauma into ongoing struggle rather than resolved plot point, making psychological impact into consideration that future actions must account for, making mental wounds into injuries as serious as physical ones, making trauma into thread, running through series where past pain influences present choices, making characters into people whose histories matter, making development into journey where healing is gradual and incomplete, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series that acknowledges emotional damage cannot be instantly repaired, making trauma into realistic element that cheap resolution doesn't dismiss. Fact 79. Yuji's existential crisis about his purpose and whether he's saving people or just participating in cycle of violence creates philosophical conflict where protagonist questions if heroism is possible in world where killing is necessary. The crisis demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen examines superhero narrative critically, where saving people through violence creates moral ambiguity, making Yuji into character who questions if ends justify means making purpose into uncertain concept that clear answers elude, making heroism into complicated idea that self-doubt shadows, making Yuji's crisis into exploration of whether good and evil are meaningful categories when survival requires actions that ethics condemn, making existential questioning into ongoing theme where Yuji seeks meaning in meaningless world, making purpose into constructed concept rather than inherent truth, making Yuji's journey into search for reason to continue when reason seems absent. Fact 80. The theme of proper death recurs throughout series where dying meaninglessly versus dying for something matters, creating distinction between deaths that have value and deaths that are wastes. The death philosophy demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen examines mortality seriously, where characters contemplate what makes death acceptable, making proper death into goal that living towards something worthwhile achieves, making meaningless death into tragedy, that prevention requires making death into event, that context determines meaning, making proper death into theme, that grandfather's dying wish. Introduce that series continuously explores making death into certainty, whose inevitability means making it count matters more than avoiding it, making proper death into philosophy about living well rather than living long, making death into culmination that life's meaning validates or invalidates, making proper death into measurement of life's worth. Fact 81. Gojo's past arc reveals his friendship with Geto Suguru, whose ideological split created tragedy, where best friends became enemies, demonstrating how different conclusions from same experiences create irreparable rifts. The friendship to enmity demonstrates how divergent responses to trauma create opposing paths, where Gojo and Geto both experienced disillusionment but reacted differently, making Geto's descent into extremism into cautionary tale about how trauma can radicalize, making friendship into casualty of ideological differences, making Geto into antagonist who started as hero, making fall into tragedy, where good person became villain through accumulation of disillusionment, making Gojo-Geto relationship into heart of series where present conflicts have roots in past friendship, making bond into wound that never healed, making Geto's death into loss that Gojo never recovered from, making past into shadow over present. Fact 82. Geto's disillusionment stemmed from encountering humanity's darkness repeatedly, where protecting ungrateful masses led to questioning if non-sorcerers deserved protection, creating supremacist ideology where sorcerers were superior. The descent demonstrates how noble intentions can corrupt when expectations aren't met, making Geto into extremist who started idealistic, making ideology into response to disappointment rather than inherent evil, making Geto into extremist character whose evil has comprehensible origin, even if conclusions are wrong, making supremacy into logical extreme of frustration, making Geto's plan to eliminate non-sorcerers into final form of disillusionment, where if masses are ungrateful, then removing them solves problem, making extremism into answer. That despair suggested making Geto into villain, whose motivations are understandable, even when actions are unforgivable, making ideology into demonstration, how good people can become monsters when pushed too far. Fact 83. The hidden inventory arc, showing Gojo and Geto's youth, reveals how idealism confronted reality, where mission-protecting star plasma vessel, Rico Amanai, ended in failure, teaching that effort doesn't guarantee success. The failed mission demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen subverts typical shonen, where heroes don't always win, making failure into formative experience that shaped both Gojo and Geto differently, making Rico's death into catalysts that set divergent paths, making hidden inventory into tragedy, where doing everything right still resulted in failure, making mission into lesson, that world is unfair, making failure into reality, check that innocence destroyed, making arc into Bildungsroman, where boys became men through experiencing powerlessness, making hidden inventory into foundational arc that explains present through showing past, making youth arc into essential backstory that current events contextualizes. Fact Oshemji Toji's assassination of Rico and near killing of Gojo created trauma that awakened Gojo's full potential through near-death experience, forcing mastery of reverse curse technique for healing, demonstrating that growth often comes from suffering. The near-death awakening demonstrates how limits are broken through desperation, where survival instinct unlocked abilities that normal training couldn't access, making Toji into catalyst, whose attack inadvertently created strongest sorcerer, making assassination attempt into mistake that made Gojo invincible, making Toji's failure into success, for Gojo making near-death into crucible, where potential realized, making awakening into demonstration that growth requires pressure, making reverse curse technique mastery into achievement, that imminent death necessitated making survival into victory that made Gojo unstoppable, making Toji into character whose greatest accomplishment was failing because failure created monster that Gojo became. Fact 85. The animation produced by MAPPA Studio elevated manga's already impressive action through fluid Sakuga sequences and creative cinematography, making anime into visual spectacle that attracted audiences beyond manga readers. The animation quality demonstrates how adaptation can enhance source material where motion and color bring static panels to life, making MAPPA into studio whose dedication to quality made Jujutsu Kaisen into phenomenon, making anime into gateway that introduced series to broader audience, making animation into art that manga's potential fully realized, making Sakuga into highlight that made fights memorable, making visual direction into element that manga couldn't provide, making anime into definitive version for some fans whose experience was enhanced by animation, making MAPPA into crucial partner whose work made Jujutsu Kaisen into mainstream success rather than niche manga. Fact 86. The Shibuya Incident arcs animation featuring climactic battles with Gojo, Sukuna manifestation, and multiple simultaneous fights showcased MAPPA's ability to juggle complex action sequences, maintaining clarity while delivering spectacular visuals. The arc adaptation demonstrates technical mastery, where multiple storylines converged without confusion, making Shibuya into animation showcase that quality maintained despite complexity, making episode 17's Gojo fight into legendary episode that broke internet through pure spectacle, making animation into event that weekly anticipation created, making Shibuya arc into peak that anime excellence achieved, making adaptation into validation that investment in quality animation pays off through audience enthusiasm, making Mappa's work into reason. Jujutsu Kaisen reached cultural saturation, making Shibuya into arc where anime surpassed manga in some respects, through adding dimension that static images cannot provide. Fact 87. The opening and ending themes featuring artists like Eve, ALI, and King Gnu became hits, demonstrating how music choices enhanced anime's atmosphere, creating iconic songs associated with series. The music selection demonstrates how audio complements visual, where opening themes set tone, making songs into anthems that fans associate with Jujutsu Kaisen, making music into marketing that attracts attention, making opening sequences into time, art that animation and music marriage creates, making themes into memorable elements that stick in memory, making music into crucial component that atmosphere establishes, making song choices into curatorial decisions that taste demonstrates, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series where music matters, making soundtracks into reason. People remember episodes, making audio into equal partner with visual, making music into element that adaptation's quality demonstrates. Fact 88. Gege Akutami's art style, featuring detailed character designs and dynamic action panels, creates visceral reading experience where combat feels impactful, making manga into visual feast despite being black and white. The art quality demonstrates mangaka's skill, where composition and detail create clarity, making complex fights readable, making art into storytelling tool that dialogue supplements rather than replaces, making visual narrative into strength, where pictures communicate what words cannot, making Akutami into artist whose improvement over series shows dedication to craft, making early chapters into foundation that later refinement built upon, making art into element that distinguishes Jujutsu Kaisen from contemporaries, making style into recognizable brand that Akutami's vision created, making art into reason. Manga succeeds beyond just story, making visual quality into standard that fans expect, making Akutami into auteur whose artistic voice is distinct. Fact 89. Akutami's willingness to kill major characters creates constant tension where no one feels safe, making stakes real rather than theoretical, demonstrating commitment to consequences over fan service. The death tolerance demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen respects audience intelligence, where plot armor doesn't protect favorites, making deaths into shocks that resonate, making loss into permanent condition, where dead stay dead, making Kaisen consequences into reality that actions produce, making mortality into ever-present threat, making survival into achievement rather than expectation, making character attachment into risky investment. That loss might punish, making Akutami into creator who prioritizes story over popularity, making deaths into narrative necessity that emotional impact justifies, making willingness to kill into signature that distinguishes Jujutsu Kaisen from series where death is temporary, making stakes into genuine danger rather than fake suspense. Fact 90. The power system's complexity, involving cursed energy control, technique mastery, binding vows, and innate talent, creates strategic battles where intelligence matters as much as strength, demonstrating that Jujutsu Kaisen values clever fighting over raw power. The strategic combat demonstrates how power systems can reward thinking, where understanding mechanics creates advantages, making battles into puzzles where solutions exist beyond just overpowering opponent, making intelligence into weapon that levels playing field, making weak characters viable through clever technique use, making strategy into equalizer that raw power contests, making combat into chess, where moves and countermoves determine victor, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series where brains and brawn both matter, making fights into displays of tactical thinking, making power system into framework that creative solutions rewards, making complexity into depth that engagement sustains, making battles into intellectual exercises that physical spectacle accompanies. Fact 91. Binding vows are self-imposed restrictions that grant power by sacrificing flexibility, creating system where limitations become strength, demonstrating risk-reward principle that pervades series. The vow system demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen's power follows equivalent exchange, where gaining requires losing, making binding vows into contracts that benefits and costs both specify, making restrictions into prices that power purchases, making vows into demonstration that strength isn't free, making self-imposed limits into tools that strategic thinking weaponizes, making binding vows into mechanism that makes weak strong through accepting constraints that strong wouldn't tolerate, making vows into equalizer where willingness to sacrifice determines power ceiling, making binding vows into system that rewards commitment, making restrictions into choices that define approach, making vows into philosophy about how power works, where limitation and empowerment are inseparable. Fact 92. The cursed energy efficiency concept, where skilled sorcerers waste less energy performing techniques, creates skill ceiling, where mastery is measured by efficiency rather than just output, demonstrating that technique matters more than raw power. The efficiency measurement demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen values skill, where novice and expert performing same technique produce different results, making efficiency into mark of mastery, making wasteful technique use into indicator of inexperience, making efficiency into goal that training pursues, making energy conservation into consideration that extended fights necessitate, making stamina management into strategic element, where efficient fighters outlast wasteful opponents, making efficiency into competitive advantage that skill provides, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series where technique refinement matters, making practice into requirement for improvement, making efficiency into demonstration that how matters as much as what, making skill into determinant that separates tiers. Fact 93. The black flash phenomenon, where cursed energy impact occurs within 0.000001 seconds of physical blow, creates critical hit that power multiplies, teaching sorcerers about energy flow, demonstrating that perfect timing creates overwhelming force. The black flash mechanic demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen rewards precision where timing matters enormously, making perfect execution into power multiplier, making black flash into lottery that cannot be intentionally triggered, making phenomenon into mark of being in the zone, making black flash into experience that understanding of cursed energy deepens, making critical hit into teaching moment, making black flash into reward for unconscious mastery, making phenomenon into sign that sorcerer is operating at peak, making black flash into memorable moment that battles punctuates, making critical hit into spectacular visual, making black flash into concept that precision and power links, making perfect timing into ultimate expression of skill. Fact 94. Sukuna's true form reveal showing 4 arms and 2 faces demonstrates that King of Curses' power comes from unusual physiology and creating monster whose body matches malevolence, making form into horror that ancient evil embodies. The monstrous form demonstrates how Sukuna is genuinely inhuman, where appearance matches nature, making true form into revelation that Sukuna was never human, making 4 arms into advantage that combat techniques exploit, making unusual body into weapon that normal humans cannot replicate, making Sukuna's form into demonstration that power comes from being different, making monstrous appearance into honest expression of evil, making true form into threat that multiplies when restrictions remove, making Sukuna into antagonist, whose final form is nightmare, made flesh, making reveal into moment where Sukuna's full power displays, making true form into culmination that builds toward throughout series. Fact 95. The culling game's rules being modifiable through achieving specific point thresholds creates system where participants can reshape game, creating meta layer where manipulating rules becomes strategy. The rule modification demonstrates how culling game is complex system where understanding mechanics enables exploitation, making rule changes into objectives beyond just survival, making game into puzzle where winning means understanding, system making rule modification into tool that strategy employs, making game into negotiable structure rather than fixed framework, making changes into power that points purchase, making culling game into system that can be dismantled from within, making rules into targets that can be attacked, making game into game about gaming system, making meta strategy into viable approach, making culling game into demonstration that understanding system is weapon, making rule modification into hope that escape is possible. Fact 96. Kashimo Hajime is ancient sorcerer from past who participated in culling game, seeking strong opponent, creating warrior whose era predates modern Jujutsu society, demonstrating that history contains mysteries. The ancient sorcerer demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen's world has depth where past eras had different jujutsu, making Kashimo into window to history, making ancient sorcerer into character whose techniques are lost arts, making Kashimo into fighter whose methods are novel because they're ancient, making historical sorcerer into threat that modern techniques aren't prepared for, making Kashimo into character whose motivation is simple desire for worthy fight, making warrior into opponent who respect demands, making ancient sorcerer into demonstration that modern doesn't mean superior, making Kashimo into character who proves old ways have merit, making historical fighter into validation that past matters, making Kashimo into thread connecting present to history. Fact 97. The theme of generational trauma, where children inherit parents' burdens and conflicts, creates cycle that series examines through multiple family dynamics, demonstrating how past shapes present inescapably. The inherited trauma demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen explores how history repeats where children relive parents' failures, making generational conflict into inevitability, that breaking requires conscious effort, making inheritance into burden as much as blessing, making families into systems that dysfunction perpetuates, making children into victims of parents' choices, making generational trauma into cycle that awareness can break, making families into sites of conflict that resolution requires, acknowledging past, making inheritance into theme that multiple characters explore, making generational trauma into pattern that series identifies, making families into complicated relationships that love and resentment simultaneously contain, making inheritance into destiny that conscious choice can reject. Fact 98. The Jujutsu Society's conservative leadership creates systemic antagonist where institutional inertia prevents reform, demonstrating that sometimes heroes' enemies are structures rather than individuals, making systems into villains. The institutional antagonism demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen examines power structures where organizations develop momentum that individuals cannot redirect, making higher-ups into obstacle that transcends personal villainy, making system into enemy that defeating individuals doesn't solve, making institutional reform into necessary change that revolution requires, making Jujutsu Society into place where rules serve elites, making system into mechanism perpetuating inequality, making institutional antagonism into critique about how societies resist change, making Jujutsu leadership into demonstration that good people can serve bad systems, making institution into character whose defeat requires systemic change rather than just defeating leaders, making society into final boss that cannot be fought with cursed energy alone. Fact 99. The international Jujutsu community's introduction, showing that curses are global phenomenon and creates expanded world where different nations have different approaches to curse management, demonstrating that Jujutsu isn't uniquely Japanese. The international expansion demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen's world is comprehensive, where curses threaten everywhere, making international community into element that future exploration might develop, making global threat into concept that unifies humanity, making international sorcerers into potential allies or rivals, making expanded world into horizon that series could explore, making globalization into factor that Jujutsu Society must consider, making international element into demonstration that Jujutsu Kaisen's scope could expand beyond Japan, making global community into untapped potential that future arcs might utilize, making international context into reminder that story could grow, making world building into investment that might pay off, making global threat into concept that implications has for future, making international jujutsu into frontier. Fact 100. Jujutsu Kaisen's ultimate theme explores what gives life meaning when death is inevitable, making series into existential examination where characters seek purpose in finite existence, creating philosophical core about living well rather than living forever. The existential theme demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen is ultimately about confronting mortality, where accepting death enables living fully, making finite life into gift rather than curse, making meaning into constructed concept that individuals create rather than discover, making purpose into choice that agency enables, making death into certainty that makes present matter, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series about finding reasons to continue when cosmic meaning is absent, making existentialism into framework where responsibility for meaning rests with individual, making life into project that each person must define, making death into teacher whose lesson is that time is precious, making meaning into answer that questions are what makes life worthwhile, making Jujutsu Kaisen into meditation on mortality that concludes that living well means choosing purpose and protecting what matters, despite knowing everything ends, making series into argument that finite makes life meaningful rather than meaningless, making death into context that gives life weight, making Jujutsu Kaisen into story about how we face inevitable end with dignity and purpose, and love making series into ultimately hopeful despite darkness, because humans create meaning in meaningless universe through choosing to care and fight and protect, making Jujutsu Kaisen into celebration of human will that persists despite knowing struggle is temporary, making series into affirmation that finite life is worth living fully. And so we conclude our comprehensive journey through 100 facts about Jujutsu Kaisen, the series that explores how curses born from human negativity threaten world requiring sorcerers to fight in shadows, where Yuji Itadori became vessel for Sukuna, creating protagonist living under death sentence, where Satoru Gojo stands as strongest, whose limitless and six eyes make him invincible until sealing removed him from board, where cursed techniques create diverse combat styles that strategic thinking rewards, where domain expansions represent ultimate power that guaranteed hits provide, where characters like Megumi, Nobara, Nanami, Yuta, and Maki each contribute unique perspectives and abilities to rich ensemble cast, where antagonists like Mahito, Jogo, and Kenjaku present genuine threats through power and cunning, where Shibuya Incident changed everything through sealing Gojo and killing beloved characters, where Culling Game creates deadly tournament forcing confrontation, where themes about death and meaning and purpose pervade creating philosophical depth, where animation by MAPPA elevated already excellent manga through spectacular visual execution, where Gege Akutami's willingness to kill characters creates real stakes, and where ultimately series examines what makes life meaningful when death is certain, creating existential meditation on living well in finite time. The lasting significance of Jujutsu Kaisen extends beyond just being successful, shonen manga, into being work that meaningfully engages with darkness and death and trauma in ways that genre typically avoids, creating series that respects audience intelligence through refusing easy answers about heroism and justice, teaching that saving people is complicated when violence is necessary for protection, creating moral ambiguity that simplistic good versus evil narratives cannot contain, demonstrating that power systems can reward intelligence as much as strength, when cursed energy mechanics create strategic depth, showing that animation quality matters through MAPPA's spectacular work, proving that investment in visual excellence pays off, establishing that killing major characters creates genuine stakes when plot armor doesn't protect favorites from consequences, and ultimately arguing that meaning in meaningless universe comes from choosing to care and protect despite knowing everything is temporary, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series that finds hope in darkness through human connection and purpose-seeking that mortality makes urgent rather than futile. The philosophy underlying Jujutsu Kaisen suggests that confronting darkness, both external curses and internal negativity, requires acknowledging rather than denying that evil exists and that suffering is real, teaching that heroes aren't people who never feel fear or doubt, but are people who act despite terror and uncertainty, making heroism into choice rather than inherent trait, demonstrating that proper death comes from living toward something worthwhile, making how we live more important than how long we live, showing that trauma leaves permanent scars that don't simply heal through willpower, making psychological wounds as serious as physical injuries, arguing that systems and institutions can be antagonists requiring reform rather than just individual villains requiring defeat, exploring how generational trauma perpetuates until conscious effort breaks cycle, making children responsible for not repeating parents' mistakes, examining how power corrupts when unchecked, making even heroes into potential villains if circumstances push them toward extremism that Geto's fall exemplified, and ultimately concluding that finite existence is what gives life meaning rather than curse, making death into teacher whose lesson is appreciating present while we have it, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series that darkness acknowledges while finding light in human capacity for love and sacrifice, and choosing meaning when cosmic significance is absent. The technical excellence in both manga and anime demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen succeeds on multiple levels, where Akutami's art creates dynamic action that is visceral and readable, making fights into visual storytelling that dialogue supplements, where Mappa's animation elevates source material through fluid sakuga and creative cinematography, making anime into spectacle that broader audience attracted, where music selection enhances atmosphere through memorable opening and ending themes that series defines, where power system complexity creates strategic battles that reward intelligence, making fights into puzzles rather than just displays of force, where character designs are distinctive and memorable, making cast into recognizable ensemble whose personalities and abilities both stand out, where world building creates comprehensive setting that history and international elements both consider, making Jujutsu Society into lived-in world rather than backdrop, and where pacing balances action and character development, creating rhythm that momentum maintains while allowing quiet moments that relationships develop, making Jujutsu Kaisen into technically proficient work that craft demonstrates in execution, matching ambition in conception. The cultural impact demonstrates how Jujutsu Kaisen achieved phenomenon status through combination of quality storytelling, spectacular animation, compelling characters, and themes that resonate, creating series that mainstream success achieved while maintaining artistic integrity that pandering to lowest common denominator would compromise, teaching that audiences respond to quality when given it, making commercial success and artistic merit compatible rather than opposing goals, showing that dark stories can be popular when darkness serves theme rather than being gratuitous, making Jujutsu Kaisen's willingness to kill characters and explore trauma into features rather than bugs, demonstrating that shonen genre can mature without abandoning what makes shonen appealing, making Jujutsu Kaisen into bridge between traditional shonen and seinen sensibilities, proving that strategic power systems attract audiences who appreciate intelligence in combat, making fights about thinking as much as about spectacle, establishing that animation matters through Mappa's work, making visual quality into reason many discovered series, and ultimately showing that stories about death and meaning resonate universally, making existential themes into broad appeal rather than niche interest, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series that transcended demographic to become cultural. Touchstone. Sleep now, dear friends. Having completed this exhaustive exploration of Jujutsu Kaisen, where curses born from negativity threaten humanity, requiring sorcerers whose techniques and determination protect world operating in shadows, where protagonist Yuji Itadori lives under death sentence, yet continues choosing to help others, because grandfather's dying wish about proper death guides choices, making Yuji into character whose heroism is conscious decision rather than inevitable nature. Where strongest, sorcerer Gojo Satoru's ceiling created crisis that remaining sorcerers must navigate without safety net that invincibility provided, where students at Jujutsu High grow through trauma and triumph, learning that sorcerer life is dangerous but necessary, where antagonists present genuine threats through power and intelligence, making victories earned rather than guaranteed, where themes about mortality and meaning pervade, creating series that ultimately affirms that finite life is worth living fully through choosing purpose and protecting what matters, and where darkness is acknowledged but hope persists through human connections that love and sacrifice create, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series that faces death honestly while celebrating life fiercely, making story about finding light in an darkness through choosing to continue despite knowing everything ends, making series into affirmation that struggle gives existence, meaning even when cosmic purpose is absent, making Jujutsu Kaisen into meditation on what makes life worth living when death is certain, concluding that answer is choosing to care about something beyond yourself, making heroism into loving world enough to fight for it, despite knowing you cannot save everyone and will eventually fail, making Jujutsu Kaisen into tragedy and triumph simultaneously, where loss is inevitable, but trying matters anyway. Thank you for joining this comprehensive journey through Jujutsu Kaisen, from cursed energy fundamentals, through character arcs, through philosophical themes, through animation excellence, through cultural impact, through ultimate meaning about living well in finite time, making series that darkness doesn't flinch from, while finding reasons to continue in human capacity for connection and purpose-making, that mortality makes urgent teaching, that death gives life meaning, through making time precious, making every moment matter, because moments are limited, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series that respects audience enough to not provide easy answers about heroism or justice or meaning, making ambiguity into honesty, that life's complexity reflects, making series into mature work, that difficult questions asks while refusing simple solutions, making Jujutsu Kaisen into story that stays with you, because themes resonate beyond entertainment into genuine examination of what makes existence meaningful, when inevitability of ending makes choosing how to spend time into ultimate expression of who we are. Rest peacefully, knowing that Jujutsu Kaisen taught us that curses are manifestations of negativity that must be confronted rather than ignored, that proper death comes from living towards something worthwhile, that trauma leaves scars that don't simply disappear, that power without ethics becomes tyranny, that systems can be villains requiring reform, that meaning is constructed rather than discovered, that death makes life precious rather than worthless, that choosing to care, despite inevitable loss, is heroism's essence, and that finite existence is gift rather than curse, when time's limitation makes moments matter, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series whose darkness serves theme, making bleakness into context that makes choosing hope meaningful, making series into ultimately life-affirming despite tragedy, because series argues that struggling against inevitable is what makes us human, making fight itself into victory even when war is lost, making persistence into answer when questions about meaning arise, making Jujutsu Kaisen into series that taught us how to live by showing us how to die with meaning, making death into teacher whose lesson is living fully while we can. Sweet dreams of battles where cursed energy flows, creating spectacular techniques, of characters whose growth through trauma makes them heroes, of friendships that tragedy tests but doesn't break, of sacrifices that meaning find through protecting others, of domain expansions that ultimate power represent, of strategies that intelligence rewards, of animations that bring manga's action to life, of themes that resonate beyond pages into genuine philosophical inquiry, and of series that darkness acknowledges while finding light in human capacity for love and choice, and purpose-making that mortality makes urgent rather than futile. Good night to sorcerers fighting in shadows. Good night to Yuji seeking proper death. Good night to Gojo sealed in prison realm. Good night to Megumi carrying father's shadow. Good night to Nobara who never backed down. Good night to all who face curses. Good night to those who choose meaning. The domain is complete. Sleep in cursed energies flow. Good night, Jujutsu sorcerers. May your dreams be free of curses. Rest knowing struggle gives life meaning. Good night forever.